Be seated. Welcome back after quite a break. A couple of practical issues which are important to highlight every time, particularly for our questioners. We have no fire drill planned tonight, so if there is a fire alarm, make your way out of the building in a calm and orderly fashion. You'll be guided by staff. People with mobility issues should gather in the foyer. On the left-hand side, you'll see of the chamber, you'll see a balustrade, and if you wait by the balustrade, assistance will be provided. Toilets are at the far end of the corridor, either side of the chamber. Ladies to the left and gents to the right. Finally, we've had apologies this evening from Councillors Erin and Matthew Fulton-McAllister, Price and Schmierer. Do we have any other apologies? Councillor Evans, thank you. Okay, Lord Mayor's announcements. I just want to make two. I think I could go on. Particularly, it has not gone unnoticed by anybody that Her Majesty the Queen sadly died, and this council, officers and members, all took full part in the marking of that. And one of the things that I was so pleased that we did is having a book of condolence. And many people over the 10, or strictly speaking 11 days, came and signed that book. And in the end, we had to open up 5 books. I don't know if the last one was filled, but certainly never filled. So I'm sure when officers get a chance, we'll count signatures, but that was overwhelming. And of course, the City Hall was one place where a book of condolence was opened. A condolence was opened in many venues in the city and beyond. So that was a really nice thing. And it resulted in me making the declaration, the proclamation rather. And what was really nice, I did the homework and just looked at the last time the proclamation was made, which was in 1952, 70 years earlier, obviously. And the Lord Mayor then Hind made that proclamation, and about 2 or 3 days later, when it came into City Hall, his son had to be coming in to sign the book of condolence. So there's a nice piece of continuity, and I'd like to thank Liam Mickleborough because she slightly held on to him long enough for me to meet him, so that was really good. We made the Royal Proclamation, and obviously we proclaimed, as per the speech given from the balcony at St James's Palace, and also from some of the Lord Mayor's place, I'm not sure where, we made the same declaration. So I'm very pleased about that, and a number of people. It was a very proud day for Norwich that so many people turned up and absolutely filled St Peter's Street. And it was, once again, Norwich did good. So thank you to everybody involved. As a consequence of that, in the morning period, notices could not go out. And so a big thank you to members for your forbearance in letting it slip. And thank you to officers as well, who suddenly had so many balls to juggle that previous 24 hours they did not, and they dealt with it wonderfully. About it, we have to mark that fantastic work. Thank you, everyone. The other thing I wanted to mention is I've had a couple of meetings with members of the Norwich Jewish community who are very keen for Norwich's Jewish history to be included in the city's history. It's been a long history of involvement, and they are working on various ideas that will mark their part of the Norwich community and all that has gone on, and I look forward to some fruits coming from that work. I would now like to invite Councillor Waters, if he would say a few words. We recently lost Brenda Ferris, a former city councillor, doubted councillor by all accounts, and former Lord Mayor. So, Councillor Waters, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. A number of us attended Brenda's memorial service, and it was evident what a rich and varied life and what an impressive contribution she made to the city, and a dedicated European and passionate about Norwich's place in that European network of cities, and a speaker of 4 languages. So she was a distinguished Labour member of Bowthorpe ward for 30 years. She was, as the Lord Mayor said, Lord Mayor of Norwich and Sheriff, and when she left the council she became a Deputy Lord Lieutenant for Norfolk. Now she had a passion for enriching the cultural life of the city for the benefit of local residents. And so many of the cultural institutions we see as vital to the city, landmarks, Brenda was associated with. So she was involved in setting up Cinema City. She served for many years on the Museums Committee. She was on the Theatre Royal Trust, and she played a crucial role in the establishment of the what has become the National Centre for Writing and the UNESCO City of Literature. She's central to making Norwich the flourishing cultural centre it is today, and I always valued Brenda's experience and advice. She had a wise head on her shoulders, and I do remember with particular affection the work we did together when Brenda was Lord Mayor for the year of celebration 94 to 95 for the 800th anniversary of the first Charter of Self-Government of this great city. Brenda leaves a fine legacy and will be greatly missed.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. I think it would be appropriate to give a minute's silence for such a fine member. Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest to make on any items on this evening's agenda? No? Okay, thank you. Item 3, questions from the public. We have 3 members of the public wish to ask questions. I've just been told we have 2 questions. The first person who would have asked this evening hasn't turned up, so I'm not quite sure, but there is already a written question that they have written answer, so we'll leave it at that. There's no chance of a supplementary. I'd now like to invite Mr. John Maris on behalf of the Norwich campaign for nuclear disarmament. Mr. Marriott, would you please ask your question? You've got 3 minutes in which to use.
Right, good evening, and I'd just like to say thanks to the Council for enabling me to air this question, because it's not been aired in a public forum as far as I know, and it should be. At Lakenheath, the United States Air Force has recently positioned B-61 nuclear missiles and F-35 fighter jets to deliver them. Norwich, 42 miles away, is now a potential target for nuclear attack should America become embroiled in a nuclear exchange. There has been no democratic discussion in Parliament or local councils about this. These weapons at Lakenheath threaten the lives of Norwich citizens, who are already uncomfortably aware of the extremely loud F-35 training flights thundering over our city. I implore the Council to discuss these concerns and raise them urgently with central government. Having recently sponsored the planting in Norwich parks of tree seeds from Hiroshima as a memorial gesture of peace, the Council clearly understands there is a relevance of the nuclear weapons issue to Norwich. Can the Council please take action to address the nuclear threat facing Norwich? Thank you.
Councillor Wilson, would you please give a reply?
Thanks very much for your question, Mr. Harris. It's nice to have a topic of this kind brought to the Council. I appreciate you doing so. So, in my response, I would say, in a practical sense, it's about shaping public sentiment. So, at the height of the Cold War, during the 1980s, we were one of a number of councils that declared themselves nuclear-free zones. And you alluded to this. Recently, the planting of tree seeds from Hiroshima at a number of locations in Norwich, a gift, by the way, of the Japanese embassy in London, is a statement about remembering the awful power and effects of nuclear weapons. And earlier this year, we gave the freedom of the city to our sister UNESCO cities of literature in Ukraine, Lviv and Odessa. Ukraine decommissioned its nuclear arsenal after independence in 1991. The freedoms were awarded for defending democratic values against an authoritarian regime that has illegally invaded a peaceful, sovereign country and which threatens to use tactical nuclear weapons. So I would say that the City Council has a consistent record locally, and in the case of Ukraine internationally, of highlighting the threats that nuclear conflict poses and how it must be avoided at all costs.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Mr. Maris, you are allowed one supplementary question. Do you have a supplementary question? You've got a minute to give it if you do.
Yes, I do. Basically, the first question was really half of the issue of talking about collective self-interest for knowledge. The other half is just as important, perhaps more important in a way. Apart from the potential danger to Norwich citizens arising from Lakenheath being a possible target for nuclear attack, do Norwich City Councillors understand that should the missiles at Lakenheath be used as a first strike weapon, many of us are deeply concerned that we would be unwillingly implicated in a criminal act of mass murder? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maris. Councillor Waters.
It would be a criminal act that would lead undoubtedly to the destruction of the lives and the countries of many states across Europe and more widely. One can see the dangers of those things. And I suppose at the point which I think is particularly important that you've made and we need to be conscious of is that at the end of the Cold War we imagined that the peace dividend that came from that, the decommissioning of some nuclear weapons, stabilised the situation and actually that threat had receded, but it clearly hasn't, and we know that the Conservative government under Boris Johnson decided to expand its nuclear arsenal. So I remember the big marches of CND and the big campaigns against wanting nuclear disarmament. And I think we need to bring that back into the mainstream again, because we're seeing the breakdown of the international order in terms of maintaining peace and conflict, freedom from different states. It's not just Russia which is broken that. There are other examples, and that makes things extremely dangerous. So I think by asking this question tonight, you've alerted us to the salience of this issue. And what I will say, on the basis of the answer I gave, that we will continue to fight for peace, make that a sentiment which we need to mobilise to see the end of all nuclear weapons in the world.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waters. Our final question is from Mr. Jack Parkins. Mr. Parkins, welcome, and please, would you like to put your question?
So to begin, I would like to give thanks to those councillors who have supported striking RMT members in their ongoing dispute with the government over significant attacks upon the terms, conditions and safety measures of staff operating on the network. Can the leader comment on the need for a properly funded, democratically controlled public transport system as a key driver for economic growth and well-being to the city, and the need also for a wider agenda that supports strengthening employment rights, fair pay and good terms and conditions for Norwich workers?
Thank you, Mr. Parkins. Councillor Waters, would you please give your reply?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. But before I do that, I would like to put up this photograph, which is from the 1970s. It's the front bench of this council chamber, probably where Councillor Kendrick is sitting right now. And the man standing and speaking is Leonard Richards, who's Jack Parkins' great-grandfather. The photograph is a meeting of UCAT workers who were on strike at that time, holding a meeting in the council chamber of City Hall. So it's a very nice connection, very nice connection. So in reply to your question, on behalf of the Labour administration, I strongly endorse the views expressed in your question. The privatisation model has failed. Its financial structures built around franchising have been ripped up as passenger revenue has disappeared. The most recent proposal, Great British Railways, has not moved off the page. Infrastructure projects are shelved or cut. Timetabled train services are removed. No room in the Conservatives' mini-budget of massive tax giveaways to the already wealthy and protecting the super profits of energy companies to invest in railways, except a statement about reducing the rights of workers to take industrial action to protect their standard of living and working conditions. The railways are a public service and key infrastructure for building a strong economy. Labour nationally is committed to renationalisation. A productive economy is built on strong employment rights and decent pay, and we have a motion at tonight's council on that theme.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Mr. Parkins, you're allowed a supplementary question if you wish. Do you have one?
No, thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Waters.
Thank you very much. I would say to Mr. Parkins and Mr. Murray, first of all, thank you for coming and exercising your democratic right at this juncture in the council meeting. It's something any citizen in Norwich can do. You're very welcome. You're very welcome to stay till the end of the council meeting but you're under absolutely no obligation to do so. So stay or go. If you wish to leave, I'll give you a minute.
Sorry.
Okay. There'll be no petitions received this morning, for this meeting, rather. So we move on to the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 21st of June 2022. I call upon Councillor Galvin to second those minutes.
I need to move it first.
Second.
Sorry, I got your all specs. Councillor Waters, so would you like to?
I'm happy to move, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Galvin.
Happy to second.
So we'll move to the vote. Anyone against? No. Any abstentions? No. That's someone has to raise their arm. Okay. Thank you. Right. Just to make sure you're still there. Item 5. Questions to Cabinet members. I notice there are 1 or 2 questions, so I would ask a little bit of discipline in the, if there's a supplementary, and we'll see how it goes. Question 1, Councillor Kidd, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, Lord Mayor, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Waters, for your written reply, which gives reassurance and underlines the work already undertaken and planned for the months ahead. Now that the Secretary of State for the DWP is our very own Chloe Smith MP, my question would be on your thoughts as to what difference could have been made if the Tory government's austerity measures to shred social security and denude the infrastructure designed to deliver a more civilised social security system had not been taken since 2010. And would you have any advice for our Norwich North MP?
Councillor Waters.
The short answer to your very pertinent question is if the benefit system that had existed in 2010 had not been altered and benefits had been uprated and working tax credits had been maintained at their level, something in the order of 2 million people, fewer people would be in poverty. Social security, if I was to make a suggestion to the Secretary of State, social security should do what it says on the proverbial tin. And it's there for a reason. And if we wanted any better reason for why it's necessary, it's the circumstances that we currently find ourselves in. And we need to remind ourselves, as I was speaking to the Secretary of State, that people have paid for their social security. They're not a giveaway. People pay their taxes directly and indirectly through their productivity, earn that as part of the social contract between the state and the individual. And that has been shredded. And it's one of the greatest sleights of hand, one of the greatest frauds, I think, of the last decade, that a disconnection has been made between the benefits that people are entitled to and work for and the fact that we have a government which has argued the very contrary. I think the evidence of Chloe Smith's purpose will be seen as to whether she allows the new sanctions for people working part-time to be discontinued, not implemented. And we will be watching Chloe Smith very carefully, because we want to see whether she is helping people through a cost of living crisis or making their situation worse.
Thank you very much. Question 2, Councillor Vaughan-Thomas. Councillor Vaughan-Thomas, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
There was a supplementary question. Thank you for your reply, Councillor Waters. It truly beggars belief that on top of 12 long years of austerity, the cutting to the bone of local government, together with the once in a generation experience of COVID-19 and all its associated pressures, that this current government has so far catastrophically failed to provide support needed in meeting the costs and impact of inflation. Every councillor in this room knows that unexpected budget pressures could lead to devastating decisions around how we were to protect precious services. Will the leader write to the Chancellor to implore him to prioritise this?
Oh, I will if he's still there. I may need to write quickly. But it's a serious point. And I mean, my concern is that from announcements yesterday and today that this government is using the disaster that they've created with their so-called mini-budget to use that as a justification for saying that we need further cuts in public expenditure for those vital services you talk about and the support that is needed. They did it in 2010, saying there was a bond market crisis. There wasn't. And they will try it again. And so the next few weeks, I think, will be evidence of which direction they're taking. But this government is committed to the idea of the small state and actually shrinking people. That's what it effectively means, their rights, their opportunities. And that's something we're going to need to fight against if that happens.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waters. Question 3, Councillor Huntley. Do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I do. Could the Cabinet member outline how the social housing being built in Norwich at this time is being constructed to mitigate environmental impact?
Thank you, Councillor Huntley. I'm sure that you won't mind me basing some of my answer on the current build at 3 School Phase 3. So surveys are completed on our sites to ensure that wildlife is protected. Bat emergence and activity surveys are undertaken, as are ecological impact assessments and biodiversity net gain assessments. Trees are preserved wherever possible, and additional trees are planted to support the loss of any trees during construction, supporting our approach to improve biodiversity across the development. We are building to high environmental standards to not only assist in the cost of living, but to help prevent emissions of pollution into the air. We're providing triple glazed windows manufactured locally in Norwich, solar panels, air source heat pumps, and developing strategies for the medium to long term with respect to decarbonising homes and understanding green energy infrastructure coming from the grid. In the design of our developments, we're looking at how we can better connect areas of the city to each other, utilising potential access areas such as the Marriotts Way to enable people to better commute by foot or bike, and providing easy access to our wonderful parks and open spaces. We have both a developer in NRL and a housing delivery team for the council who will always make full consideration to the overall environmental impact to Norwich in building homes to address our housing need. Lastly, I can't resist saying that the team at Bothell are undertaking some fantastic community work, including working with St Michael's School, where I was once a school governor many years ago. Young people are being taken through a presentation on construction sites, developing homes, and the environmental and social impacts of construction. These young people are the future, and they are being involved in exciting developments in their own community.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harris. Question 4, Councillor Mike Sands. Do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and yes, I do. Thank you for your reply, Councillor Waters. Like you, the issue of food poverty remains an ever-growing concern for my constituents who live in Bothorpe, The social supermarkets, which have now successfully opened in the centre and east of the city, provide possibly a more dignified place from which people can purchase or acquire food. While this should not exist at all, it is better than food banks in my opinion. All of Norwich would benefit from the extension of social supermarkets in every community. Can he pledge to prioritise this and give this administration support to this endeavour?
Councillor Waters.
Yes, thanks very much, Lord Mayor. Yes, I think social supermarkets are a really very important initiative, and I think they have possibilities beyond this period of austerity. Once we have a change of government and people's social security is restored, one can see those social supermarkets evolving into community assets and opportunities for people to socially engage, but also useful hubs for providing people with advice of one kind or another. So I see an awful lot of potential in this moving forward.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waters. Question 5, Councillor Driver, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, Lord Mayor, thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Giles, for your reply. I went to visit the Lakeland tennis courts last week, and they're being well used as well. And it was great that the community could get in there and be used over 52 weeks of the year. So what the ones that Ham Street do. For over 100 years we've been looking after our parks and gardens, and I think now we actually need more open space to get out to for mental health and everything like this. Can I ask the Cabinet Member, will we be spending more money on our parks and open spaces to improve them and not selling more like some Tory councils have done in the past?
Thank you for the supplementary. Sorry, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Driver, for the supplementary. I played on the courts at Lakeland Rec the other week, and it was great to use those new facilities. Tennis court upgrades are going to follow in this financial year in Harford Park, also in Lakeland Ward, and at CNS. I can announce that these will be followed by further court upgrades in Alderman Walker Park, on the Heartsease, and at Bowthorpe Park. These will all form part of Norwich Park's tennis and be 100% LTA, that's Lawn Tennis Association funded. In addition, LTA funding has also been secured with the help of our Sport and Leisure Officer to upgrade the disused tennis courts at the Hewitt Academy. Some of these will remain outdoor grass courts, I repeat, grass courts, while others will become part of an indoor tennis centre, which we don't otherwise have in Norwich. The Hewitt has committed to opening these courts up to community use as a condition of the LTA funding. These new and enhanced facilities will meet the strong demand for tennis identified in Norwich's playing pitches strategy and built facilities strategy, both of which are going to the Greater Norwich Growth Board in October. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Giles. Question 6 from Councillor Padder. Councillor Padder, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So the publication of our new biodiversity strategy has attracted significant positive attention, including praise from the leading environmentalist Chris Packham. Can the Cabinet Member for Community Wellbeing comment on whether he supports the
Can I just interrupt you, Councillor Padder? You're reading out the original question, I'm assuming.
Oh, the supplementary.
To the supplementary.
Can the Cabinet Member provide examples, please, of actions taken by the Council in our green spaces in Norwich to boost biodiversity?
Please go ahead, Giles.
Thank you, Councillor Padder. Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm pleased to say that this Labour-led City Council is taking lots of concrete measures across our green spaces to increase biodiversity. Just the other week I was in Netherwood in Councillor Padder's ward of Lakenham, where the Norwich Fringe Project, working with volunteers from the local community and TCV, recently planted 1,000 fruit and walnut trees, offering a haven of food and shelter for priority species at risk. There are lots of other examples, but I will shut up and let the questions continue.
Thank you. Question 7 from Councillor Vivian Thomas. Councillor Thomas, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, thank you, Lord Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Giles, for your reply. I was pleased to see the Council has been awarded £85,000 in levelling up parks funding. Could the Cabinet member comment on progress on production of the investment plan? Thank you.
Let's go ahead. Councillor Giles.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Thomas, for the supplementary. It's fantastic news that our Parks and Open Spaces team have secured this funding. The main focus of the investment plan will be improvements to Wenston Park. The investment plan looks set to include new play area equipment to upgrade the smaller play area, alternative usage for the disused paddling pool, raising the tree canopy to improve the sight lines, removing many of the sycamore trees to allow more light through, creating some nature trails and seating areas, planting of woodland bulbs, planting alternative tree species to improve the diversity of tree stock, improving access to the woodland by constructing a bridge at the Clippers Road end of the woodland, and replacing the existing wooden boardwalk at the river edge with an alternative fabric. It will be fantastic to see this investment restoring Wenston Park, one of our Sandy's Winch parks, to its former glory. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Giles. Question 8 from Councillor Davis. Councillor Davis, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, please, Lord Mayor.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Jones, for your reply. With the current cost of living crisis deepening every day, the number of evictions in the private sector will rise steeply. Can you update Council on the range of actions and support this Council will provide our citizens if they face this awful situation? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jones, would you like to reply?
Thank you for your supplementary. I would always want to encourage any resident who's faced with eviction to approach our Home Options team, their gold standard team, one of 14 in the country with that accreditation, and they take a very proactive approach. There's been some very successful work by a member of the team in terms of challenging Section 21 notices in terms of their validity. So we try and sort of deal with it every step of the way. So it's about people seeking support from us where they can. But I think also I just like to highlight that actually there's so much we can do as a council, but actually to really protect private renters, that's going to take action on a national level. And the government first started talking about action to supposedly protect private renters back in April 2019, and we are yet to have that actually through as legislation. And I don't have much faith in the current Prime Minister to follow that through, given her recent sympathy for landlords she expressed.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. Question 9 from Councillor Peake. Councillor Peake, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do have a supplementary, Lord Mayor. Thank you for your good reply, Councillor Walters. I work in the social care sector where poor pay, poor terms and conditions are far too common. Real living wage in cities to keep from practical policy which can make some difference. Can the leader expand on his ambitions for all our city workers to eventually receive the real living wage, and along the way, hopefully, join a trade union too?
Thank you very much. Councillor Waters.
Thank you very much for your supplementary, Councillor Peake. One way in which we can move forward on the ambition to be a city where everybody is paid the real living wage is the status we've just acquired as a living wage city, having prepared a 3-year plan to significantly advance a number of employers who are paying a real living wage in Norwich, and we are launching that in a couple of weeks' time. Secondly, the Labour Party has a radical New Deal for working people, and central to that is the end of the restrictive anti-trade union laws and the strengthening of people's collective bargaining and their rights at work. So, good wages and strong trade union membership are two key pillars that are going to be essential if we're going to get out of poverty and the cost of living crisis in this city, and we're committed to doing that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waters. Question 10 is from Councillor Bridget Colton. Councillor Bridget Colton, do you have a supplementary question?
Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor. Up until the late 20th century, this city council owned and ran its own water supply. Could Councillor Summers see a role for models of social ownership, though private greed, run out on water, perhaps in the future?
Thank you very much. Councillor Stalin, to reply.
Thank you, Councillor Bridget Colton. Absolutely, I absolutely would. And it's been really heartening this week to see that public ownership of central utilities and infrastructure is right back dead centre on the political agenda, certainly for the Labour Party. And these sorts of proposals are popular across the political spectrum, interestingly enough, and perhaps surprisingly. So I hope very much that Labour will be in power very soon and will be able to implement such plans. And as I say, with a 33-point lead over the Tories at the moment, I very much hope that will be very soon.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stannard. Question 11 is from Councillor Gray. Councillor Gray, you do not. Okay, thank you very much. Question 12 is from Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Councillor Giles, for your question. Can I refer you to policy 3 in the Greater Norwich Local Plan, which refers to at least a 10% gain on the existing situation, so that's at least a 10% gain in biodiversity. Therefore, a change to the policy isn't required. Will the Council adopt a 20% target for biodiversity net gain in line with many other local planning authorities? Thank you.
Councillor Giles, would you like to reply?
Thank you, Councillor Carlo. We are happy with the ambitious and innovative biodiversity strategy that we've put forward. The development plans alongside that in progress, and both of them will be going to the SEEK panel for discussion in early November prior to Cabinet, and there will be an opportunity to discuss those matters in fuller detail on that occasion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Giles. Next question is from Councillor Haynes. Councillor Haynes, do you have a supplementary question?
I do.
Please go ahead.
Can you hear me right?
Yeah.
No, the middle one's not worked at all.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
No, all middle ones
Right, I think we can move on. I've just been told that actually there is going to be a review and of the sound system, so maybe this will be the last time such a thing happens. I think let's start with Councillor Hayes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can you
Please.
hear me? Good. I'm pleased there's going to be an improvement plan for this. Can I ask when the problem was identified and when we expect the improvement plan to be implemented, please?
Thank you very much. Councillor Waters.
Well, we knew there were going to be issues from the time we moved the service across. It wasn't, unlike the environmental services, a shift and lift. It was to rebuild a service that we had inherited from Norse, and that more than justified the fact that we decided to take this back into direct council control through a company wholly owned by City Council. And the work began before the transfer, equipping staff with new equipment, preparing people to come into the new organisation, which has been heavily invested in by the City Council and continues to be invested in by the City Council, making sure that the backlog of work which had accumulated would not fetter the new organisation or the new service, and so that has been a continuous piece of work from before the transfer and continues now, and as my answer says, that is a piece of cross-party work of members, including, of course, the leader of the Green Group, Councillor Galvin.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waters. Question 14 from Councillor Osborne. Councillor Osborne, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Harris. It's a really encouraging response. I'm pleased to see it. Please could you provide details of how the required investment for retrofitting council housing will be met?
Please go ahead, Councillor Harris.
The Labour government.
Thank you very much. Question 15 is from Councillor Catt. Councillor Catt, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I do.
Please go ahead.
The specific piece of land has been referenced in multiple council meetings, in public questions, and in multiple emails. And the piece of land is a council-owned plot, which the council does have a responsibility to remediate under its own contaminated land strategy. Given this, will you explain why the council has repeatedly refused to remediate this land, especially when there are community groups that specifically want to use this and bring it back into beneficial use?
Thank you very much, Councillor Catt. Councillor Jones, would you like to reply?
My understanding is there's an order in which these things are addressed, or we do address things that are council land, but I'm happy to look into it in more detail and get back to you. It's not a name of an area plan that I've personally come across before, so it hasn't been referenced to me, I'm afraid, but I'll follow up.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. Question 16 is from Councillor Price, who unfortunately cannot be here, so there's no supplementary vote to question 17. Question 17. Councillor Bowland, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, yes. Thank you, Councillor Giles, for your response. I think what I'm after in my supplementary question is a bit of honesty and the truth, because when I talked to Councillor Packer at the time about it, he said there was a community consultation of which none of the nearby residents know anything. So I'll be interested to see the responses of the consultation, which other options have been explored, how it has been determined that this option is the right one, what the community group is that's taken this on, and what they're going to do with it, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bowland. Councillor Giles, would you like to reply?
I'm not in a position to provide all those details in this meeting. Discussions are at an advanced stage with a community group to make positive use of the site. However, while those negotiations are ongoing, I can't disclose them in public. I'm happy to speak about it.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Giles. Councillor, question is from Councillor Schmierer, who unfortunately could not make this evening. There'll be no supplementary question. Question 19 is from Councillor Galvin. Councillor Galvin, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I do. Can you hear? Thank you, Councillor Harris, for the reply. I have asked this question before because National Energy Action called prepayment meters the worst deal in the energy market, and it could be affecting thousands of people, the council's own tenants at the moment, or potentially this winter. I wanted to ask, have you looked into how other councils mitigate this? And have you been speaking to National Energy Action on how we could possibly use smart prepayment meters for tenants?
Thank you very much. Councillor Galvin. Councillor Harris, would you like to
Yes, thank you for your supplementary. I'll be very honest, I don't know anything about smart prepayment meters, but we have got a sustainable water strategy coming out in October, I believe, that will go to Cabinet. That will give you some reassurance. But I was talking yesterday, and we are making sure that we're working really closely with our own contractors who go into people's houses. So if they arrive in a house and there's no credit on the meter, they do something about it immediately, contacting us so that they don't turn the gas off and leave. They'll sort it out at the time. What we really need sort of Ofgem to up its game as well, and to make sure that all the big energy people are offering the correct support to the people who are subscribed to them, because there's a lot of work that could be done there as well. But I will mention the smart meters to officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harris. Councillor Champion, you've got the next question. Would you like to have your supplementary question?
Yes, I would, Lord Mayor. Thank you very much. This is in relation to pesticides, and it's been an ongoing discussion. I know there's been questions for many years prior to my election. A year and a half ago, your predecessor, Councillor Packer, assured us that there would be a 3-year plan to reduce and then eliminate the use of pesticides. And I'm very interested to see that you assure me there's a detailed project for you to continue this, which I'd be very interested to be presented in the SEEP committee. And I'd also like to know if there's a timeline in which we're working to eradicate the use of pesticides in relation to the fact that we seem to not be able to because of climate change.
Thank you very much, Councillor Champion. Councillor Giles, would you like to reply?
We have made a massive amount of progress towards eliminating the use of pesticides, and as part of the biodiversity development plan, the relevant council ops teams asked the relevant teams from there is a working group in place, and as part of the biodiversity development plan, there is a strategy in place to end the use of pesticides. The biodiversity development plan alongside the strategy will be going to SEEP in early November. Apologies for using my words.
Thank you very much, Councillor Giles. Next question, 21 from Councillor Young. Councillor Young, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Yes, thank you, Councillor Oliver, for your response. Having a different bin may not just be a personal preference or even a positive desire to reduce waste, but also due to physical need. For example, some people with disabilities or elderly may not be able to drag a larger bin. So would you agree that having a system where swapping to a smaller bin would be considered a reasonable adjustment in some situations, and therefore the council should have a system in place where bin swapping can be allowed and not incur such a costly charge for people?
Thank you very much, Councillor Young. Councillor Oliver, would you like to reply?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Young. Yes, there is some possibility for adjustment, which is that the waste collector BIFA can put any particular tenant or residents on a list where they get extra help with moving a bin, and ideally we would be moving to allowing people to have smaller bins. Obviously we want to encourage people to produce less waste. but that's, as mentioned in the original response, that's something that we will be re-examining. I don't have a date for that as yet, but certainly if anybody needs particular help, then they should contact us and we can arrange with it to help them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Oliver. Question 22 is from Councillor Lovett. Councillor Lovett, please supplement.
I do, Lord Mayor, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Stannard, for your response. I too am disappointed that this council has not had input into shaping the bus service improvement plan with the County Council. However, would you agree that it takes more than new infrastructure to deliver an efficient, reliable bus service? And what is urgently required is a better bus partnership between the county and the bus operators, which can hold the operators to account when they fail to run an efficient, reliable service. Would you not agree?
Thank you, Councillor Lovett. Councillor Stannard, would you like to reply?
I absolutely agree that the bus operators should be held to account when they're not providing an effective, reliable service. And I think it's interesting, we had the Transport for Norwich Committee this afternoon, where the terms of reference were presented. And as you may be aware, we originally were told that that would be a decision-making committee, and County reneged on that. At the last meeting, we sent it back and said we'd like the option of this being a decision-making committee. Came back today, no, that's not an option. The leader of the council has decided, we weren't given the reason why, really something vaguely about the governance of the county. So that's very, very disappointing. And I said at that meeting how disappointed I was at the way the City Council had been treated on 2 occasions by the county. First of all, the disrespectful and insensitive way that they abolished the ENHAC, the Arms Agency Committee, without even consulting us, without even allowing the chairman, who was a Tory himself, to attend and address the meeting when the decision was made. There's more to it than that. And then this. We negotiated 2 places on the committee because it was a voting committee, and they reneged on that completely. And again, that's incredibly disappointing. And, you know, quite honestly, Andrew Proctor could have picked up the phone to Alan and said, I know I made this agreement with you and I promised to do it, but I'm not able to. He didn't even do that. Not even a basic courtesy. So, you know, relations with the County Council could be better. However, I did say in the meeting that the terms of reference for this new advisory committee really ought to include any transport, highways infrastructure which pertain to the city, because they were really vague about it. And I was assured, and I gave the example of the Ipswich Road scheme, which wasn't funded out of Transport for Norwich money. There's a precedent there, and I was assured that that would be the case. So, you know, in future, things like the Better Bus Service Improvement Plan, we would be able to discuss it there, unlike on this occasion. However, it's not a decision-making committee, and it's in the gift of the cabinet member, Councillor Wilby, whether or not he accepts the outcome of the committee's discussions. Deeply disappointing.
Thank you, Councillor Stannard. Question 23 is from Councillor Ackroyd. Councillor Ackroyd, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I do. And thank you, Councillor Stannard, for your answer, which is very helpful. You mentioned that you're working hard to identify solutions to ensure that new development doesn't add to the problems already existing. And I wondered if it's possible to give a couple of examples, or are you not at that stage yet? Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, basically, we're looking at the output of those new developments, and we're looking at for example, the sewage works and how they manage the nutrients which are produced by new developments, and looking at ways to control that. And there are we need to agree a way of calculating that. There's an Environment Agency calculator. We can develop our own if we will, if we'd like to, and we're working on that. And we're also looking at issues of the distance between any new development and where the worst problems are for nutrient pollution. because there's a relationship between the two. So we're doing all of those things, and we're producing a plan, and we've done that in partnership. I have to say, the unfortunate thing about this is that if you look at nutrients going into the water supply or going into rivers, water courses, the biggest problem is farmers. It's not actually houses, it's farmers. And so the agency, the Environment Agency, well, it's curious that they've picked on new house building when they ought to be clamping down on farmers. I only assume that that's a political decision. But who am I to say? But yeah, we are working really, really hard. Hopefully, we're getting into an agreed solution, and hopefully, we'll be able to start pre-planning permissions again in the near future.
Thank you, Councillor Stannard. There have been second questions received from Councillors Bogerline, Osborne, Kent, Graham, Carlo, Galvin, Haynes, Champion and Shearer. And I put an Oxford comma in there. But rather more than 30 minutes has elapsed since the start of the questions from councillors. So these questions will not be taken in line with council constitution. So we're going to move to item 6 on constitutional amendments. Councillor Haynes, who chairs the relevant committee, will speak. So I call upon Councillor Haynes to move item 6.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think these are some important changes we've got here. They seem quite small often, constitution changes, but they can be really, really important to the swift and proper running of a council. So firstly, on the Code of Conduct, we've followed recommendations of the Standards Committee, and I'm pleased that the committee worked really well cross-party, I think, here to examine the new proposed LGA Code of Conduct and make it work for our council. We did make a change to the one that was proposed by the Local Government Association. They proposed a £50 limit for declaring interest. We decided to keep the original Norwich City Council limit of £25, knowing that it's really, really important that we're very transparent in what we're given as councillors. If we're given any gifts, we wanted to make sure we were being incredibly transparent about what we were and weren't being given as part of our role. And I think updating this Code of Conduct is always a positive move, re-looking at this, because we know that our behaviour as councillors impacts on us, our parties, and how the council is perceived as well. So I'd like to take this opportunity to encourage all councillors to have a look through the new Code of Conduct, make sure you're confident with it, so that we can represent ourselves and our constituents as best as possible. On the Treasury Management, this came partly out of Audit Committee recommendation, I think, when the Audit Committee looked at this and realised there was a gap in Treasury Management oversight by members of the Council. So I'm really pleased that this has come back. We've taken feedback from both the Constitution Working Party meeting and from key stakeholders outside that meeting, and again, have worked incredibly well cross-party on that committee to get something that's going to be really positive for the Council. With such increased funding pressures on the Council that are coming for us this budget and the budgets after, I think it's really crucial that we maintain as much oversight and as much scrutiny as elected members over the way that we're managing our council's finances. The word limits brings it in line with councillor questions, so that we've got the same rules set for public questions in terms of word limits as we do for councillors. Personally, I'm disappointed we couldn't get the changes put in to make sure the public had some time to read the papers a bit more thoroughly before they were able to ask questions on what's happening at the meeting. But the Constitution is a work in progress. We can change these things in the future. And I trust the Constitution Working Party that the Council as a whole is wanting to use our powers to push for as much democracy, as much openness and as much transparency in setting rules for how the Council is run as possible. So I formally move this report.
Thank you very much, Councillor Haynes. Councillor Kendrick, within whose portfolio this lies, is going to second the item.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I'm second what I think are a number of eminently sensible changes to our constitution, as outlined by Councillor Haynes. This report recommends adopting the Local Government Association's Model Code of Conduct. The LGA's Model Code was developed over a period of time to reflect the best practice in council conduct that has been adopted by many local authorities across the country over the past few years. This Code of Conduct was supported by the Standards Committee unanimously. It's worth highlighting that the Constitution Working Party also recommend ensuring that we keep the £25 threshold of declaring gifts and hospitality rather than moving to the £50 suggested by the LGA. Although even at this lower level of £25, there's much danger of my children's gifts to me needs to be declared. Anyway, the monitoring officer has confirmed that if we do adopt the code, there are very few changes we would need to make to our practices in terms of declaring and registering the interests of members. Actually, we'll ensure that training is provided to members to ensure that we can all ensure that we all understand the expectations upon us. I'm sure if he was here tonight, the chair of the Audit Committee would be reminding us of the proposals for the Treasury Management Committee, which arose through the work of the Audit Committee in identifying this as a matter of good practice. But it's something that I also wholly endorse, as I mentioned when it was discussed at the Audit Committee. The recent changes in government's fiscal policy means areas such as treasury management require even more careful management than ever, as I think it would be fair to say the present financial statement situation is unstable in the extreme, so I think the work of this panel will be very important. Finally, as a member who's regularly responded to public and councillor questions in these meetings, allowing us a few more words to respond to such questions is very sensible. I therefore urge the recommendation to be approved by this council and second the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kendrick. Group spokespersons, Councillor Ackroyd, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It's many thanks to officers for the work that's gone into producing the report. Working Party, as we've already heard, looked at several changes, and I'll just mention two very briefly. Firstly, the removal of the word limit in response to questions from the public. Limiting the number of words can make it very difficult to achieve transparency and understanding for the questioner, as we've seen on occasions in council, as well as harder to write, so this is a small but important change. Secondly, the Councillor Code of Conduct. Clearly, it must be understood and followed by councillors, hence the need for training, especially in areas such as declaring interests, where there can sometimes be an element of confusion. It's also vital that it's transparent and readily accessible to members of the public that we actually have this Code of Conduct. In particular, the section on gifts and hospitality, to help to remove the doubts which people sometimes express that councillors could be swayed in the way they vote on important issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ackroyd. Bearing in mind the size of the agenda that we have this evening, would any of the councillors wish to speak on this? Councillor Wright, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Very quick point. Just picking up on the point that Councillor Ackroyd's just made about sort of public perception around gifts, I think it's really important to say that we in this council are not receiving the sorts of gifts that we saw the Deputy Leader of Westminster Council be found out for receiving a few years ago, where I think it was something like 554 lunches and various other things over the course of 3 years that were undoubtedly swaying their decisions on their chair planning committee. I'm sure Councillor Driver's not getting anything like that, but so I think that's just really important that we might get the odd bunch of flowers or a box of chocolates for work that we've done for our constituents, but it isn't there. We're not getting this. Things are swaying.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wright. Any other members wish to speak? In which case, Councillor Hayes, would you like to respond?
I'd just like to thank the fellow members for their comments and hope we can all vote for this.
Thank you very much. So we'll now move to a vote. All those who are against this motion? Anybody abstaining on this motion? And those in favour, please demonstrate. So it's a unanimous. Thank you very much. Item 7, report of the Audit Committee. I'm sorry to report that this will not be going on this evening. The Chair of Audit Committee has given us apologies, so the annual report of the Audit Committee will be taken at November instead. So. Item number 8, annual report of the Scrutiny Committee 2021-22. Can I just say before inviting Councillor Wright, Chair of Scrutiny, to speak, I've just been notified of an error on page 87 of the agenda papers. Paragraph 28C should refer to the tenant involvement panel and not the tenant improvement panel. So, well spotted, Councillor Harris. Councillor Wright, would you like to move the motion?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, with that clarification noted. I'd like to begin by thanking all of those who've been involved in the scrutiny process during the last civic year, particularly those officers and members who subsequently left the council. Their collective effort has been hugely valuable to our work. Despite the changes to legislation following COVID-19 that required council meetings to take place only in person, the committee members continue to make use of their technology we've become accustomed to during the pandemic to enable us to hear from those witnesses unable to attend in person. The broadcast of meetings via YouTube also continues and gives members of the public an opportunity to watch our proceedings at a time and place that suits them. Much of the work undertaken by the committee this year continued to be framed in the context of COVID-19, with the committee providing scrutiny for the review of the environmental strategy following COVID-19, a report into the emerging new social agenda following COVID-19, and a sustainable inclusive economy following COVID-19. One meeting that was able to take a hybrid approach was the scrutiny into air pollution from wood burning. The committee was able to take in-person evidence from Emeritus Professor Claire Reeves from the UEA and from the Council's Public Protection Team at the July meeting, but reconvened in September to hear online from the Stones Industry Association and a member of the public who had introduced us to the topic. I think this ability to have a sort of hybrid approach significantly aided us when arriving at our recommendations. I have subsequently heard from the member of the public about that scrutiny. I think there are some things that we can continue to take forward, particularly around getting a quarterly tracker of the relationship between the recommendations that the scrutiny is making and from when they go to Cabinet and how they continue to sort of live and continue after that. Throughout the year, the committee has looked at various standing items that fed into the transformation and budget setting process, with members making recommendations to Cabinet that help shape and strengthen the work of the Council. Following each meeting, recommendations of the committee were considered by Cabinet and broadly accepted. Groups of councillors also serve on select committees outside the main scrutiny meeting, and one was convened to look at fly tipping and common beans, an issue that was introduced to us by members of the public from the West Pottergate area. Whilst it's disappointing that this work could not be concluded during the 2021-22 civic year, I look forward to positive outcomes this civic year. Whilst most of our meetings are scheduled, we do from time to time consider call-ins and Cabinet decisions and convene extraordinary meetings as necessary. You'll see from the document that we had an extraordinary meeting to consider the Council's self-referral to the Regulator for Social Housing following the investigation into compliance. Following lengthy scrutiny, a series of recommendations were made and adopted by the Cabinet. So, thank you very much. I hope you'll be able to agree with this annual review of scrutiny.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wright. I now call upon Councillor Burchett-Colton to second the item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Firstly, I would like to thank Councillor Wright for the way in which he chairs our scrutiny meetings and leads on this important agenda. He does a great job, is respected by everyone and should be applauded for his hard work, but also for the hard work of our officers too. As Vice Chair, I can only second and agree with what Councillor Wright has just said. I only just come back into the Scrutiny Committee, but did sub when the committee debated about wood burners and found it very informative, and the committee really asked great questions. Before rejoining the committee during the civic year, I took the time to familiarise myself with the previous reports which have come to the committee. These have become incredibly
incredibly important topics relating not just to this council, but across a huge range of social, economic and environmental issues. Subjects like county lines, the gig economy, poverty and the role of the DWP, the compliance issues last year, what Norwich future's economy could look like and who would benefit are just a few to mention. This work and the recommendations to Cabinet vastly benefit our decision making as a council and ensure the administration is held to account. We should be proud of our scrutiny committee and the way in which councillors of all parties work well together. Perhaps, Lord Mayor, given the issues covered in the national newspapers, it offers some lessons to the House of Commons as to how to run things properly. I'm very pleased to be the NPAS rep for the committee and to bring reports back from the meetings I've attended. I look forward to serving on the committee over the next year alongside Councillor Wright and would encourage all council members to attend our meetings and follow closely the important and always very interesting topics ahead. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Chipperton. I'm now going to invite group spokespersons. Councillor Osborne, would you like to speak for the Greens?
Thank you, and secondly, Councillor Bridget Colton's thanks to Councillor White, who has been an excellent chair this year and in previous years. I'd say that there's been some really good discussion of important topics on scrutiny this year, and I've been really pleased to see cross-party working and non-partisan working on scrutiny. Especially prominent in that regard was the discussion of the environmental strategy, and I was really encouraged to hear that the scrutiny recommendations that the economic strategy and the commercial investment strategy should include detail on how we progress to net zero, and I thank the Cabinet member for that as well. I can't talk about scrutiny without talking about fly tipping. It's nearly 3.5 years now since a Mancroft resident wrote into the scrutiny committee requesting that the committee look at the problem of fly tipping. A task and finish group was set up then, that didn't receive the support it needed and was duly postponed. Labour councillors then voted to postpone the fly tipping work once again, and eventually, after a huge amount of back and forth and delays, a report was worked up and presented in this civic year. It was a really good report actually, and contained ideas that Green councillors had repeatedly put forward, such as fly tipping amnesties, reducing charges for collection of bulky waste, and better enforcement. I just urge that the Cabinet provide evidence of how those recommendations should be acted on. There's a lot of good work that goes on in scrutiny, especially when we look into topics in detail, and it's really disheartening that the Cabinet has a tendency just to brush off recommendations. In fact, I know of no recommendation from scrutiny that has actually been implemented by Cabinet. And I'd like to hear from the Cabinet, from the leader, how he plans to improve that. Another example of this is the issue of wood burners, which is also a topic requested by a member of the public, as Councillor Wright has discussed. After 2 in-depth discussions, recommendations were made for a communication strategy on the health dangers of wood burners, and that communication strategy has not been forthcoming, and I believe this council can do better. Finally, I would like to urge members of scrutiny to engage in a spirit of non-partisanship. I was shocked when at the meeting of... I was shocked when at the meeting to set the work programme for this coming year, Labour members were clearly under the influence of a whip. Labour members systematically stymied the request of officers to scrutinise a key piece of council policy, the antisocial behaviour strategy. Administration councillors should really welcome the opportunity to publicly discuss in depth a piece of work, even if it provides challenges to the ruling party.
Thank you very much, Councillor Osborne. Any other councillors who would wish to speak? Please go ahead, Councillor Waters.
Yes, the tone of your contribution was hardly in the spirit of the words that came out of your mouth about non-partisan working. And of course, the Scrutiny Committee determines its own work programme, and some things become priorities, and I think there's a fair mix in terms of what Green Party councillors on the committee would like to see, as well as Liberal Democrat and Labour members. I think you are inaccurate in the comment you made about the Cabinet turning down or failing to endorse recommendations from the Scrutiny Committee, and I will go back and look over the last year, and then you will have an opportunity to perhaps correct your position on that matter. I will put that time, especially in a busy day just thinking of you, Councillor Osborne, and just attesting the accuracy of some of your comments this evening.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waters. Does any other councillor wish to speak on this item? No. Somebody speaks? No? Okay. Councillor Wright, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you to Councillors Bochet, Colton and Osborne for your comments. I think just picking up on one of Councillor Osborne's comments and the subsequent response from Councillor Waters, I would hope that the quarterly tracker coming to the meeting that I talked about would fill in the blanks and provide some sunlight as to the sort of realities of where decisions are taken by Cabinet and what the work looks like after that. So I look forward to seeing that come to committee. Also, just picking up on the point about councillors coming along and having a look at scrutiny. I've heard from councillors before who are not part of the scrutiny process, and they've said that actually watching a scrutiny meeting watching all the scrutiny meetings, which of course they can do by YouTube at the moment, gives a much better in-depth knowledge of the sort of around the workings of the council that perhaps you don't get if you just stick to the committees that you sit on. So I would definitely recommend scrutiny to everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wright. We'll now move to the vote. Does anybody wish to vote against accepting this report? Does anyone wish to abstain? All those in favour of accepting the report? Thank you. We now come to item 9, the motions. And starting with 9A, a motion to support the transgender community. An amendment to motion 9A has been received from Councillor Stannard and it's been circulated. Councillor Catt has indicated he is willing to accept this amendment. If no other members object, the amendment will become part of the substantive motion. Okay, so no members object, so that's agreed. Anyway, a second amendment to item 9A has been received from Councillor Stannard, which also has been circulated. Councillor Catt has indicated that he is not willing to accept this amendment. So it will therefore be dealt with in the usual way after the substantive motion as stands has been moved and seconded. So I call upon Councillor Catt to move motion 9A as amended.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This motion serves two purposes. The first is to send a big message to the trans and non-binary community that as Norwich City Council, we recognise their struggle, appreciate all that they bring to society, and that we stand with them in the face of the culture war that we are seeing spread through the United Kingdom at the moment. It also sends a clear message to those that seek to divide us, that their hatred and abuse is not welcome or tolerated in our city. But the second purpose is to make changes to council services to make them accessible and inclusive, with better understanding of the issues that trans people face. I originally planned for this motion to be heard at the July full council, so that it would coincide with Norwich Pride, so that Norwich City Council could throw its support behind the LGBTIQA+ community at this time. And it was quite disappointing that the administration did not deem this to be substantial enough business in order to prevent them from cancelling that meeting. But why is it so important that Norwich City Council throws its support behind the trans and non-binary community? The community has always faced very serious challenges, but in recent years we've seen a dangerous rise in transphobia across the country and a truly insidious campaign that has sought to demonise the trans community, incite hatred, and in some cases attempt to strip them of hard-fought rights. This campaign has been picked up across the country at a dangerous rate, including political parties, the media, and including our own Prime Minister as well. The sort of rhetoric that has come out from these places is toxic and seeks to undermine the trans community at a time when they desperately need people fighting their corner. Even worse, it emboldens and gives legitimacy to extremists who seek to demonise and abuse trans people. Just like those few individuals who decided to protest the recent drag queen storytime event. We need to send a very clear message that we stand behind this community, and we need to send a message in everything that we do. But that isn't enough. Trans and non-binary people face huge institutional barriers, encountering barriers and inequalities in accessing services, including healthcare, but also in services provided by the council, such as homelessness services. That's why it's crucial that if we want to support this community, we take a look at our own processes and services to ensure that every trans and non-binary individual feels able to access these services and feels comfortable that their plight is understood by the council and that is reflected in how we deliver those services. To give you some statistics, transphobic hate crimes have quadrupled between the reporting years of 2015 to 2020. Trans people are at a higher risk of domestic abuse. Almost half do not feel able to use public bathrooms. A third face negative comments and behaviour even in higher education, and nearly half avoid certain streets out of fear of abuse and hate crimes. Meanwhile, transgender and non-binary people face higher rates of homelessness and poverty than the wider population. Sadly, transgender individuals are 5 times more likely to have attempted suicide compared to straight cisgender individuals. 66% of transgender adults have had thoughts about ending their lives compared to 16% of straight transgender cisgender people. And trans adults are significantly more likely to have self-harmed, with 49% of individuals having self-harmed more than once compared to only 5% of the wider population. Meanwhile, trans people of colour suffer even more with all of these issues. These are quite chilling statistics, but ones that I think we can't ignore. I hope this gives you an idea of the plight that trans people are facing on a daily basis, and by voting for this motion, you will be putting Norwich on the map as a city that wants to be the inclusive and open place that we all know it can be. You'll be letting trans and non-binary people know that as a council we stand behind them, we understand their struggle, and we are here to support them and help them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Count. I call upon Councillor Haynes to second this item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So as has been said, this motion follows those that have been put elsewhere to focus on really practical actions the council can make to support the trans and non-binary community and make our city as inclusive as it can possibly be. And we know that Norwich has got a strong history of being really inclusive, back to the welcoming strangers in the 16th century. And while we're on a history kick, trans people have existed in history for thousands of years as well. This is not a new phenomenon. This is trans and non-binary people are valid and have existed for centuries. Indigenous Americans, for example, have long had social roles for third gender individuals. Trans individuals show up as Roman emperors in ancient Greece, in Africa, and in Thailand, so it's everywhere. These people are as valid as anybody else in our community for being exactly who they are. Unfortunately, discrimination against these communities is also not new, and that's what we're trying to address tonight in this motion. This discrimination comes publicly, it comes on the streets, it comes in the toilets, it comes across the city, and it comes within their own families as well, which is how young trans people often wind up becoming very often more homeless than cisgender individuals in the same age groups. Harassment is something that transgender people experience disproportionately, and recently we've seen worrying rises in harassment of allies as well. Councillor Cat himself received harassment on the internet for daring to stand up for the rights of trans people in our community. It's not right that trans individuals are harassed, and it's not right that people trying to stand up for them are either. We need to listen to the communities themselves about their needs, and I hope this motion can start a conversation with trans and non-binary individuals in our communities about what the council can do to help them and their communities. The trans community is diverse, it can add much to Norwich, but not just this, they're people, Trans rights are human rights, after all, and by passing this motion, we'll pass a powerful statement that says that Norwich City Council stands with everybody in this community.
Thank you very much, Councillor Haynes. Now, just so that nobody gets confused, you've got a copy of the motion with amendments that was accepted, and we've also got a sheet marked to be debated. And there was a description fairly early on of what is to be inserted where. If that is accepted, the revised motion would become as stated below. So I hope that's straightforward enough. I expect there will be further elucidation. So I'm now going to ask people to speak on this. Can I just remind everybody in the room that what we're going to debate now are the amendments. The substantive matters will be debated, I'm sure, in great detail after we have debated whether to accept or not the amendments. So bear that in mind. I call upon Councillor Stannard to move the amendment.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I want to start by saying that everyone in this room, I'm sure, accepts the basic premise of this motion. Before I talk about the amendments, I just want to talk a little bit about what I've learned during 5 decades of LGBT activism. The type of prejudice that trans people are experiencing is not new and it's not unique. It's part of a historical pattern which I've seen played out many times. The attacks on trans people are part of a wider far-right agenda to divide those of us on the progressive side of politics and to roll back not just trans rights, but after that LGBT rights and ultimately the rights their sights are set on ethnic minority rights and women's rights. I've seen this firsthand 10 years ago as chair of Norwich Pride and also as organiser of the Pride Parade here over a number of years. 20 plus years ago as chair of Norwich-based gay support group Norfolk Friend, at the time successfully negotiating LGBT-friendly policies and practices with Norfolk Police, and over 30 years ago when I was chair of the Suffolk Gay and Lesbian Helpline. I lived through Section 28 of the AIDS crisis and all the hate that was thrown since then. I've been there and I've got the t-shirt. What I've also learned is that the homophobes and transphobes look for ways in which they can split progressive opinion and thereby undermine support for LGBT people and to stir up prejudice, often based on false fears that they create. And that's exactly what they're doing now, and sadly trans people are the prime target. The fight for trans rights is everyone's fight. It's a fight for everyone who believes in equality, social justice, diversity and inclusivity. That's why it's absolutely vital that we uphold the principle of equality in all we do. Homeless policy is governed by the Housing Act 1996 as amended by the Homelessness Reduction Act 2018, which sets out how local authorities respond to homelessness and the prevention of homelessness. It requires us to apply equal access to services for all, including vulnerable groups, for example, refugees, Ukrainian nationals, people fleeing domestic abuse, people with dual diagnosis of mental health issues. It does not allow us to single out any one group for preferential treatment, and there is a legal test of vulnerability that we need to apply to every client, irrespective of their protected characteristic. This includes any trans person who has exactly the same rights as anyone else.
I'm saying this to help you. You've got this opportunity to argue why these specific amendments are being proposed.
I'm just, with all due respect, Lord Mayor, I'm explaining why we are taking issue with the proposals around housing policy. I'm specifically talking about housing policy, so I think that's relevant.
It's up to you. You've got the time.
Sorry, am I not on subject? I've lost track of time now. Could you tell me how far I am into my 3 minutes?
I'll give you 15 more.
15?
You've got another 40 seconds. So.
Okay, I thought I had about a minute and a half, but anyway. So a trans person has exactly the same rights as anyone else, and we will continue to do this, and that is what the amendment states. We also want to work with the LGBT community and to consult them on how we mark specific days of remembrance. Hence the amendment to work with Norwich Pride to consider how best to do this. Over the years, I've got sick and tired of well-meaning people telling me what they're going to do for me. I'd actually like to be asked, and as a former chair of Norwich Pride, I would be delighted to have such a conversation. There's no point having that conversation if you've already decided some of what you plan to do. That undermines the whole purpose of consulting in the first place. I've discussed this with the current chair of Pride. He's acknowledged that while flags are an important symbol, it's also about what the council could do more broadly. And he's already asked about a permanent symbol, for example, having a rainbow crossing or even a mural for LGBT people. There are many, many more ideas out there than just a flag, and I think we need to go with a blank sheet of paper to Norwich Pride and talk about what they would like, not what we think they should have.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stannard. Councillor Waters, I call upon you to second the amendment to the substantive.
I'm happy to second the amendment and reserve the right to speak.
Thank you very much. Upon this amendment, proposed amendment, are there any other councillors who wish to speak? Councillor Haynes, go ahead.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Stannard for his comments there. I agree that this is Emily's fight, and as somebody who's experienced biphobia myself within the LGBT community, we can do a lot more to tackle the biases within our own community. I think the majority of the amendment was useful and constructive, hence why we accepted the majority of it. I do have some issue with using the word consider in regarding to marking trans visibility. I don't think what we're proposing is incompatible with what you want, actually. And the mural sounds like a fabulous idea, I have to say. I think we definitely can work with Norwich Pride. We're very keen to do that. But I think saying that we consider to doesn't perhaps put as strong a statement as we'd like. I think if we can just say we're going to do this, we can fly the flag. Beautiful flag. Got one right here. I think it would be a small but incredibly meaningful thing we can do right here, right now. We already acknowledge other events for International Women's Day, Allotments Week, Pride itself, the Battle of Britain, for example. We already have a precedent where we acknowledge these kinds of events. I think we can say we can do it without the consider to, and I think that doesn't preclude us going to Pride, Norwich Pride, talking to them and saying, we want to fly the flag, what else can we do? And I think that's a much more powerful statement. On the continues to, my colleague put a councillor inquiry asking if there was a specific policy around trans and homelessness, and there isn't. So I think saying continue to is a little bit inaccurate. We're not asking you to single out the trans community for special treatment. We're asking you to acknowledge that 24% of the young homeless people come from the LGBTIQA+ community, that 25% of trans people have experienced discrimination in housing, and as an incredibly shocking statistic, a fifth of young trans people have felt they had to agree to casual sex in order to find somewhere to stay when they were homeless. I think it acknowledges that these statistics mean that the problems of homelessness that trans people and non-binary people experience are a different issue to those in the cisgender community, and therefore that we need to consider how we can make our homelessness policy work for these people. So it's not asking to single these people out, it's asking us to look at their individual challenges and see how we can best manage them.
Thank you very much, Councillor Haynes. Would any other member wish to speak on this amendment? No, so Councillor Stannard, would you like to respond?
Thank you. And I mean, all I would say is that the Housing Acts and our housing policies are legislatively led, and so we don't have specific policies for specific protected groups, and we're not required to have that. And indeed, if we did, we would therefore be seen to be giving some preference to specific groups. And of course, once you start identifying those groups, you can end up with a really long list. And what if you miss somebody out, or people then argue that they should be added to the list? The most effective way of doing this is to have policies which work for everybody, which are inclusive for everybody, and in doing so, and we would be, because that's what we do at the moment, we would be continuing to do that. So I think that's really, really important. You know, there is a legal test of vulnerability that we have to apply to every council who approaches us, irrespective of their characteristic. It's not about your characteristic, it's about whether you're vulnerable, and that's the most important thing, because just having a characteristic doesn't necessarily make you vulnerable. And we apply that same test to everybody, and trans people have exactly the same rights as anybody else in that process. I think it's really important to do that. I was going to say that in my next speech, but you know, you can't chunk up equality and hand it round differentially to different people. If you do that, it isn't equal. There is no equality. Either we're all equal, or we're not. You can't have your freedom at someone else's expense. It's a basic philosophical principle. I think it's really, really important, and it's enshrined in the legislation. So I think these are this is about what we're allowed to do, but also ensuring that we truly have policies which treat everybody equally and are sensitive to the individual needs of everybody, and that is what we do. And as I say, I think if you say you want to consult the community about what they should do, but before you go and talk to them, you've already made a decision, I think that undermines the process and actually weakens your position. So that's why I say we should be saying we would like to consider a whole range of things, but we will be guided by Norwich Pride, who are very happy to engage in that with us because we're already talking to them.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stannon. We will now move to the vote on whether to include this amendment, the substantive motion. So, all those in favour of including the amendment? Okay. All those against? Any abstentions? No. So the amendment's carried, and we now have, as the substantive motion to be debated, the motion as set out on the sheet mark to be debated. So we've had the mover and the seconder. I now call upon group spokespersons, and group spokesperson for Labour starting. Councillor Stunnock, you've got 5 minutes.
Yeah, again, I'll keep this short because a lot's been said already. We're over time. Please respond on behalf of the Labour group. Just want to say, first of all, 4 years ago, Norwich Labour Party's all members meeting passed unanimously, and this is the following motion, although I paraphrased it. It said, in accordance with the Labour Party values, standing against discrimination of any kind and creating a just society, this party acknowledges that trans men are men and trans women are women. As such, trans women should have access to stand for and participate in all party programmes and roles within the Labour Party and in government. This includes, but is not restricted to, allowing trans women equal consideration for all women shortlists, officer elections and programmes aiding women, such as the Joe Cox Women in Leadership programme. We stand with our trans brothers and sisters against transphobia of all kinds. I think that's pretty clear as a policy statement by Norwich Labour Party, which, as I say, we passed that 4 years ago. It was passed unanimously at an all-members meeting. I'm not going to say much else because, quite simply, I think the validity of the motion and the intent of it before us tonight is self-evident. It's self-evident that trans women are women, trans men are men, and non-binary people are non-binary people. All have the right to live with dignity, respect, and equality of opportunity. I believe every single member of this council will see it as self-evident. I fully expect this motion to be passed unanimously. I see no need to make a long speech as if I need to persuade you, colleague councillors, to support it. I know you all vote in favour of it without hesitation. However, I will reiterate one thing. The fight for trans rights is everyone's fight. The attacks on trans people are, as I've said, part of a wider far-right agenda to divide those of us on the progressive side of politics and to roll back not just trans rights, but after that LGBT rights, and ultimately their sights are set on ethnic minority rights and women's rights. Think about the recent success they've had in the United States over abortion rights. It's all part of the same campaign. I'm reminded of some very wise words about freedom and liberty, which for me sum up the universal nature of human rights equality. You cannot have your liberty at someone else's expense. Freedom is indivisible. In other words, if my freedoms impinge on your freedoms, we do not have equality. You can't chunk up equality and hand it out in different quantities to different people. The fight for everyone's human right is my fight, and my fight is theirs, whoever, wherever. So Council, let's get on, pass this motion unanimously with as little fuss as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stonor. Group spokespersons, Councillor Wright, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll try and be brief, but I've been quite a bit, so I'm going to canter through it. Trans women are women, trans men are men, non-binary people are non-binary. The opening words of this motion are a powerful sentiment, which I'm sure councillors here today can subscribe to. But it's important to recognise that however supportive we are, our trans friends are having to contend, day in, day out, with a level of abuse and demonisation that many of us do not experience, or will not experience. In part, this is due to becoming clear that a minority of our citizens and even representatives in our parliament do not feel the same way as us, choosing to see trans people as threats and choose to attack and undermine them for simply existing. Trans women are women and trans men are men. How can they be threats when all they're doing is living their lives, no different from you and me? Maybe one could look at this being part of a wider culture war looking to stoke division in our society and at the expense of trans and non-binary people. As a country, we've strayed from the civilised society, tolerance, openness, inclusivity, the strengthening of individual rights and the abolishment of illiberal laws that prohibit people from living their lives to the fullest extent. The idea that Liberal Roy Jenkins championed as Home Secretary under the then Labour Party leader Harold Wilson, if it weren't for him, Britain would not have decriminalised homosexuality, removed theatre censorship, legalised abortions, banned racial discrimination at work, to name a few of Jenkins' accomplishments. Whilst Norwich has for many years been supportive of trans rights, I remember as a child attending our local church on Park Lane, where a trans person was welcomed with open arms. There is still much more to do. Will we as a society end up looking back and be totally ashamed of ourselves in 30 years' time? Just as now we are looking back at the appalling way gay men were treated in the 1980s when AIDS came to prominence. Annual recognition of Trans Day of Visibility and Trans Day of Remembrance is hugely important. While rights and recognition of transgender people have improved in the last couple of decades, there is so much more to be done. Later motions this evening pick up specific issues where there's been transphobic backlash. Open any right-wing tablet these days and you'll find scaremongering, inaccurate bile, which makes life so much more difficult for transgender people. Imagine how you would feel if your very right to exist and be accepted as who you are is called into question. Imagine how that must feel if you're a child or a young person, struggling to come to terms with your gender identity. Even the National Trust is joining in, with a very small minority of members putting forward a motion at the AGM on the 5th of November, in quotes, to deplore, in quotes, participation by National Trust in gay pride parades as divisive and an unaccountable waste of members' subscriptions, close quotes. So if there's any National Trust members here, make sure you vote against those particular motions that are coming to the AGM. So just I'll finish quickly. If you haven't seen already, I recommend that members here watch, there's a James Acaster piece a couple of years ago where he takes aim at comedians that have a go at transgender people. And he says, you know who's long been overdue a challenge? The trans community. They've had their guard down for far too long, if you ask me. We're very happy to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wright. Any other councillors wish to speak on this? Okay. Councillor Cat, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to thank everyone for the support across the chamber tonight. It's great to see the council coming behind the LGBTIQA+ community, and on that note I want to thank Councillor Huntley and Councillor Wright for their respective motions that they're proposing tonight, because I think they do shine a light on some very specific issues that the LGBTIQA+ community are facing in terms of the barbaric practice of conversion therapy, as well as throwing our support behind Drag Queen Storytime, an amazing scheme that has proven to be very popular but has unfortunately been targeted by extremists recently. I really hope that by passing all of these motions, the City Council can send a really strong and unanimous message that hatred and division is not welcome in our city, that we recognise the challenges that the LGBTIQA+ community face, with a commitment to supporting them in everything we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Count. We'll now move to the vote. All those who are against the motion? All those who wish to abstain on the motion? All those in favour, please raise your hands. Yeah, unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody. Now, strictly speaking, I should wait another 5 minutes and we'll be on our way with the next motion. But I'm going to take the tiny liberty of saying, well, first of all, asking you, can the rest of the, what? Okay. We're playing with time. Well, I think to certainly make the this meeting move properly, it will take 10 minutes now, and we'll start again, and we'll still be within the time period because of the loss of time. Okay, so please come back into, well, near 5 minutes. recommence. Now, trying to do this time dance, we are now at 2 hours. The next item, 9B, clearly is opposed because there is an unaccepted amendment, so we will debate that. And I think we'll see how times and people's preferences are after debating 9B. So, you all got in front of you a sheet of paper, 9B, with just a sec, yeah. Do people feel able to give a view now on the other items?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, right. And what is that view? Does anybody wish to oppose? Well, let's start with C. Pardon? Yeah. Does anybody oppose?
We're opposed C.
Okay. C. D.
We're opposed D.
D as amended. Does anybody oppose? D. E. Anybody oppose? E. Pardon?
I won't be opposing my own motion.
Jolly good. And F. No. Go ahead. Clear enough. Right. So we know where we are. And we'll see how we are, because I suspect we're 10:30. So, item 9B, you've got it in front of you, and an amendment has been received from Councillor Stannard. The wording has been set out there, and the consequent revised motion, if it is accepted, will be given as well. However, yeah. However, it is not being accepted. So we'll start by calling on Councillor Carlo to move motion 9B as it stands. Councillor Carlo.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I wish that we could go home and maybe watch Newsnight on the next episode of the Trussonomics saga, but hopefully we can dash off at 1:15. And yes, I wish that this motion hadn't been opposed, but I couldn't accept the amendments, and I explain in the next part of the meeting. But at the risk of sounding like a character from Monty Python, when I was growing up, nature was much richer, but what was commonplace has now become rare. And the loss of nature is reflected in the UK State of Nature reports, which say that the UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world, mainly due to industrial farming and urbanisation. It matters hugely because we need a healthy environment rich in biodiversity to absorb carbon, provide clean air, water, store water, support food production and bring us joy. Norwich can be proud of its rivers, marshes, woodlands and of Mousehold Heath, but for too long the council has rested on its laurels. These jewels in the crown are isolated islands, eroding the small green stepping stones across the city that link together to form networks makes it impossible for nature to move around. The creeping, crawling nature within Norwich has become hemmed in by major roads which encircle the city, apart from the river valleys and railway lines. During my 40 years in Norwich, I have observed the gradual loss of many informal patches and specks of nature. Even grass is now a diminishing resource. Grass is a carbon sink, and green grass gives out oxygen and cools the air.
And so tarmacking grass for grass courts in parks wipes out these benefits, for example. It doesn't take an expert to work out the 20% growth in Norwich's population, that's the city of Norwich, not Greater Norwich, population over the last 20 years, has taken a toll on the natural environment. For example, the increase in brick, concrete, tarmac has increased surface water runoff and wastewater generated by development, contributing to nutrient overload of the water environment. New homes and jobs are vital, but little effort has been made to compensate for the loss of nature removed by building work. In new developments, we should be planting trees, hedges, grass, gardens, installing bird and bat boxes, putting in hedgehog highways and creating green roofs and walls. Such green features, though small, cover a lot of ground when they are connected up. However, politicians have not wanted to add developers' costs for fear of deterring house building. Yes, we have a green infrastructure strategy as part of the joint core strategy, but the social aspect has come to dominate. Cycle, pedestrian links and green and public access improvements to green spaces count as green infrastructure, and whilst they are good in themselves, they are not accompanied by biodiversity improvements. Many other councils have prepared supplementary planning documents on biodiversity, green infrastructure and sustainable drainage systems to provide detailed guidance on policies in the local plan. For example, a biodiversity SPD would provide developers with advice on biodiversity net gain, which will become a condition of planning permission under the Environment Act. In the Act's pursuit of the goal of more, bigger, better and more joined up, councils will also be required to prepare local nature recovery strategies for delivering nature recovery networks. In this context, the City Council is preparing a new draft biodiversity strategy. And I hope that the Council will follow the best practice of other councils and commission external consultants to prepare a high-level, high-quality strategy. Finally, we can't discuss the biodiversity emergency without addressing the climate change emergency. The extreme summer heat and lack of rainfall showed the fragility of our environment. Fires broke out on parched ground, crops shriveled, people, trees and wildlife died. Around the globe, we are seeing the face of the apocalypse if we don't radically cut emissions and adapt to climate change. Net zero by 2050 is too late. Carbon neutral for the City Council's operations by 2030 is too little. Norwich must embrace the carbon reduction pathway advocated by the Tyndall Centre and achieve a 13.9% annual reduction in emissions. If not, we will be the architects of our own fate. And I just, during the summer, I felt incredibly gloomy. Experiencing the heat, seeing the terrible wildfires around the world, in Europe, seeing the terrible famines in Africa. I wanted to paraphrase the famous text by Martin Niemöller, when he said, first the droughts came, when I'm writing this myself, first the droughts came, but they did not affect me, so I did nothing. Then the wildfires came, but they did not affect me, so I did nothing. Then the famines came, but they did not affect me, so I did nothing. Then the droughts, wildfires, and famines came and killed my family. And I cried out, but no one came to help me. Everything had perished. Greta Thunberg said that we all should feel scared. So we need to do everything in our power to reduce emissions and to protect and enhance biodiversity.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carl. I now call upon Councillor Osborne to second this item.
Formally seconded and reserve the right to speak.
Thank Thank you very much. Now, this amendment has been proposed and not accepted, so we're going to debate the amendment. Call upon Councillor Stannard to move the amendment.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The vast majority of this motion is to be commended, and I just want to make it clear, we're all concerned. We share your concerns about the declining nature, the loss of habitat, the declining species, and as I say, the motion is to be commended. First, I want to say I was a little perplexed by the failure to acknowledge the City Council's biodiversity strategy in helping to address the issues raised in the motion and the work we're already doing. The motion gives the impression that nothing has been happening when of course the reverse is the case, which is why we want to make it clear that we will continue to do various things. Specifically in terms of nutrient neutrality, we've been working tirelessly with partner councils and other agencies to address the requirements of Natural England. In addition, in relation to point 4 of the motion, we're planning to produce a supplementary planning document on biodiversity net gain, in other words, how to deliver the policy in the Greater Norwich Local Plan. But we're not planning on a SPD on green infrastructure because we cannot supplement or add to what already will be there. So just because other councils have them doesn't mean to say that that's the only route you can take. There are other ways that you can achieve the same thing. We do, however, have a comprehensive policy framework, that's Greater Norwich Local Plan Policy 3 and the Norfolk County Council policies DM6 and DM7, which are informed by considerable cross-boundary joint working and a shared evidence base. In relation to point 5 of the motion, I would contend it would not be appropriate for us to develop an SPD on subs because the County Council is the flood authority and they're the experts in such matters. It's also difficult to see what policy it might supplement. We do, however, have a water efficiency advice note on our website. So for those reasons, I urge you to support the amendments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stannard. I call upon Councillor Giles to second the amendment.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I second the amendments proposed by Councillor Stannard, which accurately reflect the fantastic work going on by this Labour-led City Council to combat the unprecedented decline in biodiversity we are seeing globally. Our draft biodiversity strategy, which received praise from among others respected environmentalist Chris Packham during consultation, includes an ambitious Norwich nature recovery network which aims to go further and faster than Norfolk County Council in seeking not only to halt species decline, but increase species diversity and abundance by 2030. Lord Mayor, however, our biodiversity strategy is not just warm words. It reflects what we are doing in practice and what we will continue to do at an even faster rate. At Mousehold Heath, in my own ward of Crome, a grant of £30,600 was secured from Natural England for a higher level stewardship agreement to improve the quantity and quality of heathland and acid grassland, nationally important habitats. This work has led to the identification of a number of species, a number of scarce and threatened bee and wasp species, a number of butterfly species such as small copper and green hairstreak, and a number of moth species including true lover's knot, heath rustic and beautiful yellow underwing. At Ketts Heights in Thorpe Hamlet ward, represented by 2 of the members opposite, £300,000 has been secured in SIL funding for biodiversity enhancements. The planting of fruit trees, wildflower seeding, bulb planting combined with significant access improvements to enable clearance works is transforming this forgotten gem into a haven for wildlife. This summer, GNGB funding through the Infrastructure Investment Fund was utilised by the Norwich Fringe project to excavate the historic ditch system at Cringleford Meadow to encourage fish spawning, as we previously did successfully at Marston Marshes. Lord Mayor, I have a long list of practical measures our fantastic officers are taking, and will take at an even greater pace still to tackle the biodiversity crisis here in Norwich. However, I don't wish to keep our staff here all night, so I won't run through all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Do any of the councillors wish to speak on the amendment? Champion, go ahead.
Thank you. I would like to speak on the amendment. I don't believe that our policies go far enough. I'm on the planning committee. Just today we were looking at the SUDS implementation of the UEA. The water catchment has to be lined because our city is on chalk, and they're worried that if they don't line the SUDS catchment and the UEA, that it might contaminate the aquifer underneath the UEA. And the planning officer who was giving that committee, when I questioned him on this, he admitted quite openly that actually the policies don't go far enough, that actually our policies are very weak in this regard. Also, in relation to Mousehold Heath, and it's commendable the work that we're doing there, but we've had a 90% reduction in butterflies this year. That drought just wiped it out. Today, in this meeting, I've heard about nutrient neutrality, and I've been told it's nothing to do with the city and urbanisation, it's to do with the farmers. And I went to the very first planning meeting where the nutrient neutrality was being discussed. Everyone was like, oh, it's the farmers. It's like the ownership isn't taken on board. We have offsetting in relation to planning. In the planning committee, again, I see plan after plan where biodiversity is accommodated through offsetting, through allowing the biodiversity to be increased somewhere else and not in the urban area. We need to change our attitude. And I mean, right now, I can see across the chamber people shaking their heads. But really, genuinely, we've got a genuine, absolute crisis. We're talking about the survival of our species. And I feel that sometimes, really what we need to do is we really need to be working together, cooperating. I would invite members of the across the chamber to walk with me in my ward and in Crome Ward, which I believe is the leader of the opposition's ward, where there are biodiversity corridors, and I'd love to take a walk with you and show you some of the projects which I would like to undertake. I invite you to come with me. Earlier on, my colleague here, Alex, was referring to, Councillor Cat was referring to a piece of land where we've been planning to repeatedly asking, and I've brought the application to council to start a community garden where we would like to be educating about biodiversity. And it's just brushed down and just ignored. And I feel these are partisan decisions. We need to be taking this further, we need to be working together. And I genuinely feel that right now across the chamber there is a feel that this is an attack on you. This is a plea. This is a genuine plea that we need to be working really cooperatively and genuinely. We face extinction if we don't sort our stuff out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd just like to pick up Councillor Stronard's point about it not being necessary that we have a planning document on SUDS, or that it should be a county-council responsibility, and then it's not clear which policy we'll be referring to. I have actually spoken to planning officers about this, and a number of the ideas in this motion came directly from the council's own officers, so it is possible.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lovick.
Yes, I agree with the last two speakers. I too feel extremely frustrated when we have planning applications coming before us, and we can't even insist on a water butt being provided, let alone a green roof or a swale. These are small things, but they add up to a lot of surface drainage coming down the street into somebody's house at some point or another. It's simple measures that we should be able to take to protect the city from when we have these downpours and from sort of flooding that takes place. And it's the same with biodiversity net gain. You know, putting a few holes in the fence to allow hedgehogs through is about as much as we can manage. It is just, we are seeing the problems but not having the tools to deal with them. And we know that other authorities have stronger opportunities than we do. And we are now allowing places to be built that don't have the basics of a water butt. Now, whether or not that will change under our nutrient neutrality mitigation plan, I don't know. But it seems just so much more sensible to write these into a supplementary planning document and to give us some teeth. So I'm disappointed when I see the changes considered when I know that you're not going to consider.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lovett. Any other councillor wish to speak with regard to the amendment? Councillor Carlin, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In amending the motion, Labour accepts that biodiversity in Norwich is in decline. And I have seen over the last couple of years the Labour group take a more of an interest in biodiversity. So, for example, Councillor Packer tabled a motion on pollinators. And we also have the biodiversity strategy in the pipeline at the moment. Over the years, the Green Group and myself have tabled many questions, motions and proposals on biodiversity. But the change on the ground is so excruciatingly slow. But the issue that I particularly want to pick up tonight is planning. And that's really what my motion is about, the supplementary planning documents and the planning system. And I sat on the planning committee for several years and I felt deeply frustrated by the lack of council interest in incorporating biodiversity measures in new developments. I secured a policy change in 2014 in development management plan policies to include biodiversity features in new development, but trying to get the council to make that stick is like trying to get blood out of a stone, so it's very hit and miss whether or not biodiversity features are included in planning permissions. So the failure to use the planning system to secure biodiversity improvements is a political choice. The Cabinet, as I said earlier in my speech, doesn't want to do anything which undermines development. The planning team, in my view, is very under-resourced and the council lacks in-house ecology expertise. A biodiversity strategy and an action plan is not a substitute for supplementary planning guidance, which is intended to provide detailed advice to developers. The developers may not even bother looking at a biodiversity strategy and action plan, but they will have to take heed of the sustainable planning guidance. I think the council will find it's not able to avoid preparing an SPD and biodiversity net gain, a policy change which is mandated to implement. Earlier on we talked about the percentage of biodiversity net gain and the Greater Norwich Local Plan and also DEFRA talk about at least 10%. The City Council is talking about 10%, which is far too low. And that's a thing that needs to be discussed and brought forward in an SPD. So concerning sustainable drainage systems or sites, for example, I think it's an absolute necessity in a densely populated city which impacts on the River Wensum Sack and the Broad Sack. That, in my view, would be a sensible course of action. Therefore, I believe it's essential that the Council supports the motion as originally tabled. And I just want to add the point about crisp packing, which I'll do later on then in my roundup.
Thank you. Any other members wish to speak on this? No? Okay. Councillor Stonow, would you like to respond?
Yes. What I would say is, first of all, in response to Councillor Jamie, Osborne, is that my response was based on detailed discussions with the most senior officer in the building who deals with such issues, that is what informed the comments. In fact, some of them were almost a direct quote. So I don't know who you spoke to, but but I mean, basically, in order to achieve what you want, we don't need to have, the City Council doesn't need to have a supplementary planning document, particularly if we're not the responsible authority. I mean, this is something which can be dealt with by working with the County Council as a lead flood authority. So I think you're trying to do it the wrong way, and I do wonder whether or not the other councils that you're referring to are unitary councils, which would make a big difference. But anyway, that's my response.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stannard. We'll now move to a vote on the amendment. All those in favour of incorporating the amendment into the substantive motion, please raise your hand. All those against? Okay. Okay. That's carried, and the substantive motion is now as provided in the additional document. I'd now like to invite group spokespersons. Councillor Stannard, would you like to speak?
I'm aware of the time, so I'm aware of officers in particular.
Thank you.
Probably like to get home, and Denise would like to watch Newsnight. So, clearly, we all share the same concerns, and as I say, there's so much in this motion to commend. The Council has a biodiversity strategy in place helping to address the issues raised in the motion, and we do a huge amount of partnership working with other councils and relevant agencies. This includes the River Wenston strategy, for example, which I've been leading for over 7 years and has coordinated the activities and initiatives of many agencies to implement positive change. There are also initiatives, I'm just using developments as an example, East Norwich, where sustainability and biodiversity are at the very core of our ambitions for this new quarter of the city. And of course, there's always more one can do, but we are doing an awful lot, and I would contend we are ramping up what we do. We have a good track record, and Councillor Johns has talked about that. I just want to make a political point, really. The motion does not, however, mention who I think are the real villains of this issue. So we have water companies dumping raw sewage into rivers, seemingly with impunity. Farmers depositing nutrients in amounts which tower above any created by new housing developments. And I'm not saying we don't need to deal with that, but let's recognise who the main culprits are at the same time, because they seem to be allowed to act with impunity. And a government promising a bonfire of red tape, for which you could read a bonfire of EU regulations which have for many years protected our environment, our rivers, our green open spaces and our wildlife habitats. And I do hope you will acknowledge the damage done to our environment by the policies of successive Tory governments in recent years, and in particular the last and then the new government and their outrageous proposals to get rid of what they call red tape. Actually, they're regulations which are really important. So, Council, we're happy to support this motion as amended because we care about the natural world, I would argue, just as much as anyone else. However, it is clear that if you really want to change to protect our environment, you need to change the government. We can do a certain amount at our level, and we will do the best we can. But really, we need a Labour government which will act responsibly to protect the environment and hold to account those who willfully damage it, and will not have a bonfire of what the Tories call red tape. We will maintain those protections and regulations.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stannard. Councillor Lovett, would you like to speak on behalf of the Dems?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I was going to say I wholeheartedly endorse this motion, but I've lost a bit of heart in it. Nature does continue to decline across the UK and will do so even more if this new government and Prime Minister Liz Truss has her way. She's waging war on nature by abandoning many of the policies put in place to protect it. We hear of her supporting financially the Western Link, possibly abolishing Natural England's nutrient neutrality embargo on development, and overturning the environment land management scheme that our farmers were expecting in order to deliver biodiversity and public gain. I attended a Friends of the Earth forum on Sunday, and it was very interesting to hear Phil Hunt speak on the Council's biodiversity strategy. And there was a consensus that all those concerned about the loss of biodiversity should speak out. And it was estimated that over 8 million people belong to organisations to protect the nature, such as RSPB and the Norfolk Wildlife Trust and so on and so forth. And if those 8 million people spoke out, that would be quite a powerful voice. But I do think it needs the Council to be speaking loud and clear about these issues. And I do accept that we're doing something with our biodiversity strategy, and it's long overdue, but we're getting on with it. We just need to hear the details of it. But it's what we do locally that really matters, and I can't see how a county council can have any input into our planning applications that come before us. Every minor sort of addition to a domestic dwelling, we can't say you should have a water butt. Even at that level, we have to let these things go through so that new houses or extensions are built without water butts. Now, how can that be of any sense? And where are the county council in all that? You say they're the flood authority, so they should have a say in it, but they aren't the ones sitting in the room agreeing to these planning applications, and we can't do anything about improving the applications that come before us because we don't have the teeth to do it. And it's just hugely frustrating. You look around and see the developments just outside Norwich and South Norfolk, huge new properties, but they don't have any green roofs, they don't have much. Well, anyway, it's just I just feel that we've got to start local and do what we can, and I think this is an opportunity that will be missed here. I'm not in favour of seeing our countryside and wildlife destroyed for the sake of pursuing growth for any sake and just greater GDP. Growth must come with net benefits to the environment, to biodiversity, and to people's health and well-being, and that's part of what our job is to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bobby. Does any other member wish to speak?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I completely agree with Councillor Stonard's point that the government is doing nothing to help biodiversity. But I'd like to invite the Labour Cabinet to consider themselves a mini government in waiting in Norwich, in that sense, and use this to try and push.
They're already Councillor.
Use this to try and push. Excuse me, it would be really, really nice if you listen.
Yeah.
Thank you. And use this as an opportunity to push the most ambitious strategies they can. So I think the words biodiversity and supplementary planning documents are the kind of things that would send fear up the hearts of most voters. It seems very obscure, but I think when we talk about what the impact nature has on the children, we are a city, we've got very tight boundaries, we're surrounded by housing on all sides, and we've got to really think about showing that leadership within our urban areas so that the children that live in our area have as much ability to see nature, to experience the wonderful biodiversity we can have in this country for themselves. We've got beautiful parks, we've got all sorts of things that we could really, really be making a difference on. So I think, yes, the government's not doing enough. up on this, but we could be much more ambitious ourselves as well.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hayes. Councillor Hampton.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just to say, I do agree with Councillor Stoner that the majority of this motion is to be commended, and I think that especially now we've incorporated the bit about the biodiversity strategy. I'm looking forward to that coming back to see the climate panel at our next meeting. But I did want to quickly address a couple of points Councillor Carlo made in her very first speech about how biodiversity emergency is inextricably linked with the climate one. And you're right, net zero by 2050 is too late, and that's why we brought our target forward on that point, and we are committed to continue working with partners towards that, including via the Norwich Climate Commission, who have representation from others, including the Tyndall Centre, who you mentioned. And as ever, we just can't let the government off the hook with this. It needs to invest in council, so we can go as far and as fast as we would like to, and it needs to invest in the transformative national climate action that we really need to see to cut emissions on the scale urgently required to avoid climate catastrophe. So let's just not leave that important context out again, and again, to make the point explicit, the best way around this is a Labour government.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Does anybody else wish to speak on this motion? No? Okay. Councillor Carlo, you've got 3 minutes to respond.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Thank you very much, everyone, for your comments, and I do feel that everyone in this room is on the same page, and so that's very encouraging. Just a few points to make. On the Chris Packham point, what he actually said on his Twitter was that he supported the proposal in the biodiversity strategy to rewild parts of parks in Norwich. And yes, we would like to see that actually happen, so we will hold the council to that. On the biodiversity strategy itself, I have got some misgivings about it, and so Councillor Champion and I are seeing Councillor Giles shortly, and that's very welcome. But this, and we can all agree on the baddies. This absolutely, I mean, there are not enough words to describe the government at the moment, and it's very amusing to read some of the satire on Twitter accounts. The atrocious county council, the highways, 8 national highways, the water authorities and so on, a very, very long list. And actually on that, whilst we're talking about national matters, I hope that the Labour councillors here will encourage their Labour ministers to support the environmental land management scheme and not to seek a delay to it, because I think it's really important for improving farming sustainability. But coming back to the motion tonight, it's specifically about planning and biodiversity, and there's so much more we can be doing here, and hence proposing SPDs. And I think that the SPDs will come for biodiversity and biodiversity net gain, because as I say, it's mandated by the Environment Act. And that's probably all I've got to say tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lovell. Sorry, Councillor Carlo. We're all going to vote now. All those who are against the motion as stands. All those who wish to abstain on this. All those in favour, please indicate. Right. Motion C, 9C, cost of living crisis and the Norwich economy. This will. I think we've got time set to start and therefore to finish. I call on Councillor Waters to move motion 9C.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And briefly, so the introduction to this motion describes a dystopian economic landscape an economy that doesn't work for tens of millions of people in this country, and the proportion of workers in poverty has risen continuously for the last 20 years. Increases in the minimum wage haven't been enough to make up for the inadequate social security, high housing costs, insecure, insufficient working hours, and Conservative governments have reneged on introducing post-Brexit employment legislation which would have extended workers' rights, built in safeguards for the gig economy and for 0 hours workers. And instead we can expect further deregulation of employment rights under a trust government. So we need to turn a bad economy into a good economy, and this motion seeks to do that through arguing for the end of restrictive anti-trade union laws, the work that the Labour Party is doing nationally around a radical new deal for working people fleshes out the opportunities that will come from an economy that you build from the bottom up, rather than apparently allowing large amounts of wealth concentration to trickle down. So there are major things that need to be done, and I've spoken about these in the previous debate about the need, or in questions, to rebuild a proper welfare state in the social security system. The motion also highlights the work that we're doing as a council in terms of supporting people during the cost of living crisis, ensuring they get the benefits and the rights that they are entitled to. And we spend over £2 million a year on the council tax reduction scheme, and we invest significantly in supporting people and signposting them, and there is a report which is going to be coming to a future scrutiny committee on that. We need to change that landscape, we need to change the thinking, and the work of the Good Economy Committee's recommendations give us a good basis to do that, alongside the work we're doing around being a living wage city. And the Norwich 2040 Partnership are meeting next week to discuss it collectively what we can do to tackle the cost of living crisis and put all our resources across Norwich to good work to see people through this very difficult time. So with those comments, Lord Mayor, I would like to move this motion.
Thank you very much. I call upon Councillor Jones to second the item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As both a nurse and a councillor, I see daily the devastating impact the cost of living crisis is having on the lives and crucially the health of our residents. The phrase choosing between heating and eating has become too normal, and as winter sets in, prices spiral and wages lag so far behind, the brutal consequences of this are going to become far more stark in our city, as we have a government who willfully ignores working people. I'm reminded of a moment in the pandemic that made it onto every single news channel. The country came out to clap for carers and key workers, alongside the millions of ordinary people who stood on their doorsteps to show their appreciation to those who often on some of the lowest wages, who continue to work in our hospitals, care homes and supermarkets, despite the very serious risks to their lives. I too remember the Tory politicians who tweeted and shared photos of themselves doing so too. So I'd like to ask those politicians who basked in the efforts of key workers, what did your claps mean? Were they as hollow as they now seem? None of those key workers are close to being in the 1% receiving a £2 billion tax giveaway, whilst nurses find themselves on almost the same tax rate as millionaires now. The reality is, as a nurse working full-time, and I'm luckier than most, I too will need to make difficult choices, having to weigh up the cost of fuel to drive home after a 13-hour shift, or coming home to a warm house. Feels like a dystopian reality when I hear colleagues considering just how far into winter they can make it until putting their heating on, and one I do not believe this government chooses to understand. It's not just one or two of us impacted, it's working people in almost every sector across the city, and we know that what we need to both survive and thrive. We need a strengthened trade union movement, and that's so important that anti-trade union laws are repealed, ensuring workers' voices are not only heard but acted on, driving up standards of employment and wages for the benefit of both workers and the economy. Radical change at a national level is essential, and Labour's New Deal for working people will deliver this for our city. But the next election is more than a year away, and our residents need support now just to get by. So I'm pleased that as a Labour City Council we commit to using our financial inclusion strategy and our resources to mitigate this crisis where we can. And we will continue to use our position of influence to support sustainable and inclusive growth through apprenticeships to end the real living wage and developing a fine city employers charter. This City Council will work for all its residents, not just the 1%. So Lord Mayor, if you believe in supporting the many, not the few, I encourage you to vote for this motion tonight.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. I now invite group spokespersons. Councillor Cack for the Greens.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As a proud socialist from a socialist party, myself and my group are happy to support this motion. I remember the 2010 election result when I was quite a young teenager and wondering if my parents would continue to have jobs, whether they could put food on the table and how we would cope. And for many, it's been over a decade of this, as the Tories have slashed public services, gutted local authorities, and made lives harder for the most vulnerable in our societies. So, as a country, we desperately need a change with a Green New Deal, a universal basic income, a 4-day working week, and living wage, just to give a few examples of the things that we need. However, we know that this motion does little to commit the Council to do anything substantive, and we would wish that the sentiment of this motion would be better represented in the actions of the Council, especially given that the Council has only narrowly avoided strike action from their own workers in recent years. In addition to this, there is a huge repairs backlog with some of the most vulnerable in our cities struggling to get their homes kept in good condition. Meanwhile, the Council has refused to commit to abiding by their own rules on affordable housing in developments such as Anglia Square. And as we enter winter with energy bills rising rapidly, no progress has been made on the commitment to retrofit the social housing stock. There's been no sign of long-term energy improvements in efficiency in the HRA, and the Council continues to take little responsibility for the number of residents who have prepayment meters, which leave them with no safety net. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cack. Councillor Ackroyd would like to speak for Lib Dems.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm going to be very brief, although I do recognise the great importance of this motion. Last week we saw a budget that will make top earners even more wealthy, while leaving the country and the poorest more impoverished. This is a budget driven by a leader who is beginning to make Margaret Thatcher look left-wing. It was a budget that will allow wealthier people to dine out in style, while those on the breadline scramble for crumbs. So in the word often used in this council, this motion is timely. Starting with Thatcher, the aim has been to weaken unions and deter people from joining, meaning that companies can force down wages, leaving lower wage earners poorer and at the mercy of unscrupulous employers. The result is 0 hours contracts and poverty wages. You only have to read some quarters of the press to see how any group of workers who take action in defence of its standard of living is labelled greedy, disruptive and accused of ruining companies by reducing their profits. The truth is, of course, very different. The protection of trade union and employment rights, including the right to strike, has never been more important. Norwich, as a real living wage city, is a positive step to helping counteract 0 hours contracts and poverty wages. It's interesting to look at which Norwich firms are accredited as real living wage employers and those high-profile local businesses which are not and currently advertising jobs below the real living wage. This could be a lesson to them. A fine city employer's charter rewarding employers who treat workers with respect will help to ensure that Norwich's residents have access to the best working conditions with fairness and a shared commitment to our environmental responsibilities at the core of employment standards. Employee representation on boards should be at its heart. We must lead the way in supporting employees in accessing fair conditions and pay, as well as supporting businesses that put sustainability at their core. We do need action from the government to support local government and statutory agencies, but it's hard to see that with Liz Truss at the helm, this will be any more forthcoming than hitherto. We fully support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ackroyd. Do any other members wish to speak on this? Councillor Richard. Do you want to go for the votes? And then Councillor Sands and anyone else?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Having dealt first-hand at the Silver Road Community Centre Food Bank, how the cost of living is totally turning upside down families' lives in most parts of the wards in Norwich, I would just like to highlight just how awful life is and how degrading it is to have to feel you're begging for food. It is utterly disgusting that food banks and social supermarkets even need to be around to help people to feed their families. It isn't just people who are receiving social security benefits that are using them, but lots of families with both parents working having to use them. Just recently, the Silver Road Community Centre has received £10,000 from the Norfolk Community Foundation to give out increments of £100 to people not being able to pay their electric or gas bill. In just 3 weeks, all of the money was gone. I had people coming to me who had £1 left on their meters and were in such a state, wondering if they were going to feed their child or use it to get hot water to wash their child. Our community fridge has been a godsend on a Saturday morning to people wanting bread and fruit and vegetables, and just lately donations of frozen meals have been available too. Bread Source and the Food Hub have helped us to feed the residents in NR3. Stats show that 1 in 4 people in Sewell are suffering because of the cost of living, and on the other side of this is how their mental health is being affected. We have started a wellbeing cafe on a Wednesday afternoon where people can come in free of charge, have coffee and cake on the 1st and 3rd week of the month, and have a meal made from ingredients from the food bank on the 2nd and 4th week of the month. Around 20 of us sit together and eat and also do arts and crafts. The point is that this is just the sort of thing that people suffering with their mental health and feeling anxious because of rising bills need. Somewhere to totally just shut the world out, enjoy time together and feel good about yourself. Just the other week we were told that the grant through Empowering Communities has been granted to us. This means we can now open our Older People's Silver Road Cosy Cafe once a week, helping older people to come into our centre, keep warm and have something to eat and drink each week. Unfortunately, the government believe that people who volunteer and grant-based bodies will pick up the slack they had totally wiped away. It is utterly unforgivable for that older people, people with mental health, young people and families have been left to fend for themselves. The electric and gas bills are scaring people, making them not even want to open their emails or letters. Can you just imagine, for instance, someone who is anxious and worried about their bills having a letter land on their doormat saying that the prices have raised horrendously? With lots of the support workers being taken away from vulnerable people, what hope do we have for the future without community centres such as the one I run and our wonderful volunteers? Lord Mayor, the root cause of this calamity is the Tory government. The Tory budget earlier this month was a classic reverse Robin Hood trick. The richest 1% get a tax cut while working people suffer and pay the price, and our economy is destroyed. Enough is enough. Please accept this motion and send a message tonight.
Councillor Mike Sands.
Very hard act to follow with Julie there. I'd like people to just recall the comments Alan Waters made earlier this evening about the loss of working tax credits and also the loss of other various welfare and benefit measures. We mustn't forget also the iniquitous bedroom tax, which still bites many people in the backside, imposed by this government on hard-pressed families, which continues to impact on these families and their ability to live with dignity. One last thing from me. Only in today's news, PM Truss is on the record of saying she will not give or make available financial advice to hard-pressed families and individuals trying to cope with the cost of living crisis. That's the Tory government for you. The sooner they're gone, the better.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sands. Does any other member wish to speak on this motion? No. Councillor Waters, would you like to respond?
Well, I'm hoping that this will get unanimous support from all parties, though I'm not sure, given Councillor Catt's rather sour remarks. The only thing I would say is it is perhaps easy for some, certainly not for me, to dismiss the possibility of redeveloping a dreadful blighted site in the north part of Norwich and to just simply allow that to continue to happen, I think is, or suggest that to happen, is I think a condemnation really of not reaching the interests of the people of Norwich and the people in that community. I'll say no further remarks. Colleagues have spoken eloquently on this issue, and it is about resetting what good economy looks like, and the City Council should be in the forefront of that, as Labour administration certainly is.
Let's move to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. We are virtually 3 hours, or if I can quote the words of guidance, or at a convenient point before. And I think we are literally 5-6 minutes in, and we have come to the next motion. Are people keen to carry on?
Can I speak?
Yeah,
as the proposer, the paper's actually incorrect. I was proposing this and Jake was seconding it. We would like to carry this over to the next meeting because we think we should have the opportunity to discuss it and to debate it in full council and give members across the council the opportunity to show their support.
Okay. Well, let's just, and the other two, I think it was agreed would.
They'd be passed.
Okay. So, I'm bearing that in mind. I'm closing this meeting. Thank you very much.